Imagine a room, completely empty. No furniture, no decorations. White walls, white floor, white ceiling, nothing. Now imagine you're standing in this room and someone tells you, your ego cannot exist in here. In this emptiness, there is nothing for it to hold on to. No identity, no story, no audience, no mirror to admire itself in. Now here's my question, and I need you to sit with this before you answer. Does the idea of that room make you feel free, or does it make you feel terrified? Because your answer to that question will tell you more about the relationship between your ego and your spiritual ambitions than anything I could say in this entire video. And before we go any deeper into that question, if you're someone who's tired of being told what you want to hear and you actually want the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable, hit that subscribe button right now. And if anything in this video cracks something open for you, leave a comment telling me which part hit hardest. I read every single one. And hit that like button because it helps this reach someone who needs to hear this today. Someone who's been on a spiritual path for years and has no idea what's actually driving them. All right, let's begin. You're drawn to spirituality. Maybe you meditate. Maybe you've read books about consciousness, ego death, mindfulness, or the nature of reality. Maybe you follow teachers or podcasters or content creators who talk about awakening. Maybe you've downloaded apps like Insight Timer or Waking Up. Maybe you've gone on a retreat somewhere beautiful. Maybe you've had moments, genuine moments, where you felt something vast and peaceful and deeply true beneath the noise of your everyday mind. And those moments were real. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not here to take them away from you. But here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody in the spiritual world wants to address. The spiritual identity itself, the version of you that says, I am on a spiritual path, is one of the ego's most powerful survival strategies. And I know how that sounds. It sounds almost cruel. It sounds like I'm about to ruin the one thing that's been giving your life meaning. But stay with me, because what I'm about to show you isn't going to destroy your spiritual life. It's going to set it free. The ego doesn't fight spirituality. It infiltrates it. Think about that for a moment. You've probably been taught that the ego is the obstacle, that it's the enemy standing between you and enlightenment, that your job is to kill it, dissolve it, transcend it. But what if that's exactly what the ego wants you to believe? What if the entire narrative of battling the ego is itself an ego move? Because as long as you're fighting something, there has to be a fighter. And that fighter, that one who's doing the battling, that's the ego wearing a hero's cape. Let me tell you about someone I once knew. On the outside, they were everything the spiritual world celebrates. They meditated for an hour every single morning without fail. They spoke in that calm, measured, almost ethereal tone that signals awareness. They used words like presence, consciousness, and surrender with effortless grace. They had thousands of followers on Instagram who admired their wisdom. They posted about their inner journey with stunning photographs taken in golden hour light. They went on retreats in Sedona. They flew to Bali. They attended sound baths and breathwork sessions and sacred ceremonies. From the outside, this person was the picture of spiritual evolution. And they were miserable, not on the surface. On the surface, they were serene. But underneath that serenity, there was a constant, grinding, exhausting need to be seen as enlightened. Every meditation session was secretly a performance, even when no one was watching, because the audience had become internal. They were watching themselves meditate and evaluating whether they were doing it well enough. Every moment of peace was immediately cataloged, assessed, and compared to the moments of peace other people were reporting on social media. Every setback, every moment of frustration or anger or doubt was experienced not just as pain, but as a threat to the identity they had spent years and thousands of dollars constructing. One day, someone close to them said something simple. They said, what if you stopped being spiritual for a week? Just stopped. Stopped meditating. Stopped posting. Stopped thinking about awakening. What would you actually do with your days? And this person froze. Not because the suggestion was absurd, because the suggestion was terrifying. Because for the first time in years, they realized that without the spiritual identity, they didn't know who they were. The spirituality had become the ego's most sophisticated shelter. A beautiful, ornate, philosophically justified shelter. But shelter nonetheless. And when they actually tried it, when they spent a week as nobody in particular, no label, no practice, no identity, something extraordinary happened. The constant low-grade anxiety vanished. The need to monitor their spiritual progress dissolved. The exhausting performance of being aware simply stopped. And in the silence that followed, in the ordinary, unremarkable silence of just being a person walking through the world without a story about themselves, they experienced something that felt closer to genuine peace than anything their years of practice had ever produced. Not because they found enlightenment by giving up spirituality, but because they finally stopped performing it. So here's what I want you to understand. The ego doesn't fear spirituality. It loves spirituality. It loves it the way a snake loves a warm rock. It curls up inside the practices, inside the language, inside the identity, inside the entire elaborate architecture of spiritual life, and it feels safe. It feels justified. It feels, for the first time in its existence, like it has finally found a home where no one will ever question whether it should exist. Because who questions the spiritual person? Who challenges the one who's supposedly evolving? The spiritual identity is the ultimate shield. And this brings us to something I need to show you. The ego doesn't just hide inside spirituality in one way. It does it in three very specific flavors. And once you learn to see them, you cannot unsee them. Not in other people. And more importantly, not in yourself. The first flavor is what I call the Enlightened Superior. This is the person who meditates and subtly, so subtly you almost miss it, lets everyone know. They don't brag. That would be too obvious. Instead, they respond to conflict with phrases like, I'm just choosing not to engage at that level. Or they mention their meditation practice casually in conversation, the way someone might mention they run marathons. Not to show off, just to let the information exist in the room. Spiritual knowledge becomes social currency. It becomes a way of positioning yourself above the noise of ordinary human drama. And the terrifying thing is it feels genuinely good. It feels like wisdom. But underneath it, there's a quiet, persistent whisper that says, I am more awake than you. I saw this at a dinner party in Brooklyn once. Someone I knew had recently gotten deep into mindfulness, and the entire evening became, without anyone naming it, a demonstration. Every time the conversation drifted toward something surface level, they'd gently redirect it. Have you ever considered why we find ourselves drawn to that kind of distraction? Beautiful question. Thoughtful. But also, quietly, unmistakably, a signal. I'm the most aware person in this room. And the people around them started to feel small without knowing why. The second flavor is the humble performer. This one is harder to catch because it comes wrapped in the language of humility. This is the person who says things like, I don't think I'm enlightened at all. I'm still very much a beginner. I have so far to go. And they say it in a way that somehow makes them seem even more admirable than if they claimed enlightenment directly. It's a performance of humility that is itself a form of pride. And there's another layer to this one. The aesthetic. The specific way the spiritual person in America dresses, speaks, moves through the world. The linen clothing. The crystal jewelry, the specific vocabulary, the way they hold their coffee cup, the entire curated visual identity that says, without words, I belong to a tribe that is more conscious than yours. I watched this happen in real time with someone who entered the spiritual world after years in corporate finance. Within 6 months, their entire wardrobe changed. Their speech patterns shifted. Their social circle transformed completely. And when I asked them about it, they said it felt like becoming their true self. But I noticed something. They hadn't shed an identity. They'd replaced one tribe's uniform with another's. The Wall Street suit became the linen pants. The networking event became the sound bath. The business card became the Substack newsletter about consciousness. The ego hadn't dissolved. It had simply redecorated. The third flavor is perhaps the most seductive of all. The perpetual seeker. This is the person who is always on their way to enlightenment but never arrives. They've read every book. They've tried every practice. They've been on every retreat. They've sat with every teacher. And somehow, no matter how much they consume, how much they experience, how much they understand, the destination keeps moving. There's always one more book to read, one more practice to try, one more teacher to sit with. And this seeking feels so good. It feels like devotion. It feels like dedication. It feels like the most important work a person can do. But here's what I noticed in someone I knew who lived exactly this way. They had the same restless, compulsive energy around spiritual experiences that other people have around alcohol, or social media, or online shopping. The seeking itself was the addiction, not the arrival. The arrival would have been terrifying because the arrival would have meant the end of the story. And the ego needs the story to continue because as long as the story is running, the storyteller exists. Now you're probably doing something right now. You're scanning. You're checking. You're holding up these 3 flavors against your own life, and you're seeing yourself in one of them, maybe all of them. And something uncomfortable is stirring. Maybe a little guilt. Maybe a little defensiveness. Maybe the urge to say, well, at least I'm aware of it now, which would itself be another ego move. And that brings us to something I have to be honest with you about. Something that makes this entire conversation genuinely paradoxical. This video, this very insight about the ego hiding in spirituality, can itself become another trophy on the ego's shelf. You could watch this and walk away thinking, I'm so aware that I can see through the spiritual ego. And that right there will be the most sophisticated costume the ego has ever worn. It would be the ego using self-awareness as its newest identity. And I'm not saying that to make you feel trapped. I'm saying it because the only way through this trap is to see it clearly and to understand that there is no final insight that permanently dissolves the ego. There is no ultimate understanding that sets you free once and for all. Because the moment you have the insight, the ego claims it. So what's the answer? If every spiritual practice can be hijacked, if every insight can become an ego move, if even seeing through the game is itself part of the game, then what do we actually do? Here's what I've come to understand, and it took me a long time to arrive here, and even now, I hold it lightly. The way through isn't more awareness. It isn't more practice. It isn't more understanding. It's a quality of attention that isn't trying to get anywhere at all. Not enlightenment as a destination, but presence as something that requires no achievement, no label, no story, just this, whatever this is, right now. And I want to make this concrete because I'm not here to leave you in beautiful philosophical confusion. I'm here to give you something you can actually use. The first thing I'd invite you to try is what I call the anonymity test. Before any spiritual practice, any meditation, any journaling, any ritual, pause and ask yourself this one question. Would I do this if absolutely no one would ever know about it? Not your followers, not your friends, not even you as an internal audience watching yourself be spiritual. If the practice loses its appeal the moment it becomes invisible, that's information. That's your ego showing you exactly what it was getting out of the practice. The practice that survives total anonymity, the one you do even if it disappeared from existence the moment you finished, that's the practice worth keeping. The second invitation is something I call the boredom practice. And this one is genuinely uncomfortable because it goes against everything the spiritual marketplace sells you. Deliberately choose spiritual engagement that isn't interesting, that isn't peak, that isn't transcendent, that doesn't feel profound or meaningful or life-changing. Sit with spiritual boredom. Just sit. Don't make it into a practice. Don't give it a name. Don't post about it. Just be bored. Because the ego craves meaning. It needs depth. It needs significance. And boredom is the one place it cannot make itself important. In genuine boredom, there is no story to tell. And in the absence of story, something very quiet becomes audible. The third thing is what I think of as the identity audit. Periodically, consciously, deliberately drop all your spiritual labels. Not forever, just for a day, a week. See what remains when you're not the spiritual person. See what feels threatened when that identity goes quiet. And see what feels relieved. Because if something in you breathes easier when you stop performing awareness, that's telling you something profound about where your ego has been hiding. And finally, and this might be the most important one. There's what I call the mundane gateway. Find presence not in meditation halls, or on retreats, or during breathwork sessions, or in sacred ceremonies. Find it in the most ordinary, unremarkable moments of your life. Washing the dishes, sitting in traffic on the 405, waiting in line at the grocery store, walk and get the mail, folding laundry. If awareness only shows up in special conditions, if it only arrives when the setting is right and the mood is right and the practice is right, then the ego is the one deciding when consciousness is allowed. And it's only allowing it in moments where it can feel special. I once knew someone who spent years chasing mystical states, plant medicine ceremonies, holotropic breath work, silent retreats in the mountains of Colorado. And every single one of those experiences gave them something extraordinary. But the extraordinary always faded. It always went back to ordinary. And the ordinary always felt like a disappointment. Until one Tuesday afternoon, they were standing in their kitchen in their old apartment in Austin, washing a single dish under cold water because the hot water heater had broken again, and something shifted. Not a mystical experience, not a peak state, just a sudden, quiet, inexplicable sense that this exact moment, this cold water, this chipped ceramic bowl, this unremarkable Tuesday, was somehow enough, was somehow complete. And that feeling, that tiny, unspectacular feeling, was closer to what every retreat and ceremony had been promising than anything those experiences had actually delivered. Because here's the truth that took me decades to fully absorb. Genuine awareness was never something you needed to achieve. It was always there, underneath the costume, underneath the identity, underneath the seeking and the striving and the spiritual resume you've been building. It was there before you decided to become someone. It was there before you downloaded the first app and read the first book and booked the first flight to Bali. It was there in the empty room I asked you to imagine at the very beginning of this video. The one that terrified you, or freed you, or both. The ego will keep showing up. It will keep dressing up. It will keep infiltrating your practices and claiming your insights and turning your awareness into another achievement. That's what it does. That is its nature and its function and its endless, tireless job. But you have seen it now, and seeing it, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a pattern to be understood, that changes the entire game. Not because you've won, but because you stopped playing. You are not your spiritual identity. You are not your awakening story. You are not your progress, or your practice, or your understanding, or your collection of teachers, or your Instagram feed, or your Substack newsletter, or your retreat stamps, or your vocabulary. You are what was here before you decided to become someone. The ego will keep dressing up. That's what it does. But you, the real you, the one that has no name and no resume and no followers and no spiritual credentials, that one was never lost. It was just buried under a very convincing costume. And now you can see it. And seeing it is enough. It was always enough. If this stirred something real for you, if it made something uncomfortable and something relieving happen at the exact same time, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment and tell me which flavor of ego spirituality you recognized in yourself. There is no wrong answer here. There's only honesty. And honestly, that is the bravest thing you can bring to this conversation. And if you want to keep exploring the places where philosophy and genuine self-knowledge meet, the places where the truth is stranger and more uncomfortable and more freeing than anything the spiritual marketplace will ever sell you, subscribe. Not because this channel will make you spiritual, but because it will keep telling you the truth. Even when the truth is that you don't need to become anything at all. The ego will keep performing. Let it. You've already seen through the game. And that changes everything.